Evening and welcome everyone to our ACLA meeting this evening. We have a very special guest speaker. It is Dr. Richard A. Panzer, who's an author, and his latest publication, what we're going to be focusing on today, is called the Genesis 1:28 Civilization and Its Enemies. So besides being an author, Richard is the co-host of the MAGA Kingdom Report podcast, which you can watch on X and maybe other platforms. And he's written books and made documentary films, educational programs for hundreds of thousands of youth worldwide. And he is the president of the Sanctuary Church in North America. Graduated from Yale and New York University. He and his wife, Miho, have 4 children and 3 grandchildren, with possibly more on the way. So,
No,
welcome, Dr.
thank you.
Panzer.
Technically, we have two and a half grandchildren with one in the oven, and we expect it in late July. So
Okay, well, congratulations. That's
that's
next
what we're
month.
hoping. Yeah. Oh,
And yeah, we don't really care where they are. They can be in the oven, they can be
yeah.
outside, well, we'll count them. So that's great. So, you recently just published this book. Was it like in the past month or so?
Yeah, well, actually, I came out with the first version in mid March.
Oh, okay.
But actually today we just updated the manuscript and published it, so people can, order it off of Amazon or other places. So and we are working on an audiobook
Oh,
so
okay.
people can listen to it. Yeah.
I did see it on Amazon, and it is a very interesting title, and also there's got like I guess a heading at the top of the book where it says how experts trampled human rights,
Right.
Genesis 1:28 civilization and its enemies. So, what kind of book is this? What kind of category would you put it in? Is it a book, a religious book, a scientific book? Is it politics? What is it?
All of the above. I look when I was growing up, my family, I have a lot of medical doctors and nurses in my family, and basically in my family, education is the religion, basically. So the and I began to realize that people who claim to represent science, they do not always tell the truth. And that's a major theme of the book. The Here in the West, we think that we have all this great technology and science and healthcare treatments, and we're proud of our culture, and we should be proud of our culture, but we think it came just out of the man's reason, but that's actually not where it came from. So the a major theme of the book is that the world that we know today, which believes in universal human rights, bans slavery, bans infanticide, has the idea of the rule of law for all people equally. That's the ideal. It did not come from Greek philosophers. It didn't come from scientists. It didn't come from a an Islamic imam or a Buddhist monk. It came from the teaching of the Bible. And so there are several chapters where we go into this and explain how the worldview that was revealed by Moses was very radically different from the worldview of most of the other religions in the ancient world. So the in the ancient world, there were beliefs in polytheism, different gods. Usually, those gods had all kinds of drama in their lives, affairs, rapes, a lot of kind of like a soap opera, basically. And the idea was that the productivity, food growing, uh, plentiful food and resources could be gained by honoring these gods by making even human sacrifice. So the revelation through Moses actually said, well, no, we're not going to sacrifice human beings. We'll sacrifice animals. And there is one God, not a smorgasbord of different gods. There is one God, a God of justice. So we call it ethical monotheism. So there's one God who is just, and he expects us to be just and to treat everybody, regardless of who they are, in a just way. And this was a pretty radical departure from many of the religions of the time. So that's the basis of the revelation from Moses. Desexualized God. God creates not through not sexual relationship with some other being. God creates through his intellect and intention and will. So, and that creates a different culture. So I guess I'll just say that
Okay, well,
now.
that's a good summary, I guess, overall picture of what it's about. And yeah, I think it does seem to address something very fundamental about civilization. Of course, Moses came long time before, what we see as the great societies of the Roman Empire, what
Mhm.
is taught to us as great cultures, Roman Empire or Greek culture that had all the Greek gods and everything else. But even in time of Moses, right, there were all these other civilizations, right, which you can read about in the Bible
Right.
that worship different kind of gods and had strange practices like human sacrifices and all that. So, meanwhile, the Moses Judeo-Christian civilization was planted and was growing, right? And then eventually came to America.
Yes.
Just before we go on,
Yeah.
Richard, I'd just like to say that if we have time at the end, we will have open up the floor to questions. So if everybody wouldn't mind, just hold back until we get to that point. That's okay. All right. So for those who don't know, maybe you're not biblical scholars or don't have one in front of them. Can you remind us what Genesis 1:28 says and why that's the key
Yeah.
of what you're
So
thinking about?
Genesis 1:28, to paraphrase it, God tells the first human beings, Adam and Eve, to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. So the in the unificationist perspective, fruitfulness means achieving spiritual maturity, and multiply means basically what we all understand: have intimate relations and have children, and having dominion over the creation. So it affirms the idea of ownership, and and then of course God is asking us to be just and fair in our relationships with other people. We the way that we honor God is by honoring other people. And there's the idea of each of us is created in the image of God. That is different from basically all other religions. I mean, the Buddhism doesn't, and Taoism, they don't necessarily even believe that there is a creator, right? So that's not in their worldview. And Islam believes that if you are following Allah, then you are blessed. But if you are not following Allah, then you are cursed. So it's a different way of looking at things. In our society today, We believe in the idea that everyone has the right to be at least legally treated the same. That is not the way many other civilizations look. In other civilizations, it's based on which family or clan you belong to, right? And and if you're of a lower class, then you have a lower status. You know, in the Hindu religion, you have a lower caste, lower value. So the biblical view is very different. And then the Christians in the early centuries after Christ, they banned infanticide. Before that, in many other cultures, it's very common just to throw your child out in the trash. You know, in China and many places, even the Romans, they had a requirement that if your child has any kind of deformity, then you're required to kill your child. So a very different point of view. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what cultures today, or society, or countries today, would you say uh, embodies the Genesis 1:28 civilization the best?
Well, I
You
mean,
say all
you know,
Western countries do, or
okay, so I mean, any believer in God knows that we all fall short of His glory, right? So, so, but by definition, none of us can say personally that we have no sin, right? And therefore, I doubt that you'd find many Christians saying that America perfectly embodies God's justice and truth. However, it is true that it was the Christian nations first in Great Britain and certain European countries and America that banned the slave trade. That didn't happen anywhere else. So there's some very unique ideas that came into being because the followers of Jesus Christ applied his teaching to the real world and made a lot of sacrifice and a lot of effort to end slavery, for instance. So I do believe, you know, our idea of universal human rights, that is actually, if you say that you're against slavery and against infanticide and you believe in universal human rights, then actually you're agreeing with Jesus Christ. Whether you believe in him as the savior or not, we're living in a world that reflects the teaching and person of Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago.
but didn't European white Christians invent slavery, Richard? That's what I heard. I learned in
Yeah, I
school.
know yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book because there people need to understand. Look, slavery has existed for at least 5,000 years from the beginning of human history, and the only culture in the world that banned it or made it illegal were the Western Christian countries. The
Yeah.
Arab slave trade has existed for more than 1,200 years. It's actually still being practiced in Africa. There's several nations which are Muslim dominant nations that they still have slavery. Actually, they've been trying to ban it, and they of course nations pass laws, but whether they actually put into practice is another issue. And of course, there are people in the United States who actually are trying to bring back forced labor, sex trafficking. If you look at the 10 to 15 million migrants that are brought into our country during the 4 years of the Biden administration, you have many tens of thousands, if not more, children that were brought here for forced labor or for sex.
Yes. So we are told, and when you read the news, it tells us that there are a lot of experts who are analyzing all the problems of our society. And if we just listen to the experts, that our issues will be solved. But you, on your book, it says on the top, how experts trampled human rights. Can
Right.
you explain that further?
Yeah, this is really interesting story because the you would expect. I mean, basically in our culture, we almost look at scientists as the high priests of our culture, right? They represent truth, right? As in opposition to, super religious superstition. That's the way many people look at it. But a lot of our scientific societies, they have been corrupted. So, and there's several chapters in the book where I go into what the scientists say about climate change and related topics. And you look closely, or about, for instance, the COVID-19, the COVID-19 virus pandemic, and you realize that many of the people who are considered to be the top level scientists or people at the Center for Disease Control, they were lying to us. They had another agenda, and I'm sad to say this, that was actually related to funding. There are narratives that have, and also with the transgenderism, there are many of these other ideologies which have corrupted science in the West. And I document this. I mean, this is something that, my goal was to write a book that any person, regardless of whether they are religious or not, atheist or not, they would look at the evidence and they could see what is happening. Yeah.
I mean, it seems that a lot of people or just kind of go along and get their news and information from the standard sources or the big news outlets, or at least they used to. I think people are getting away from it now as they're starting to figure out that they're not receiving the truth. But maybe some of the stuff that they're getting is really propaganda. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, so there are different strains of propaganda. So uh, I think many of the people attending may know that in 1986, there were within the unification movement, there was a manual. It's called the Causa Manual, which was teaching about the theory and practice of communism. And so one strain of propaganda is related to the the Christian heresy, which basically says of Karl Marx, which said that history is the basically the automatic progression, historical determinism of basically the war of different classes, and he believed that the workers would rise up and overthrow the capitalist oppressors and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat or the workers' paradise. So leftists who agree with Marx's perspective, they're constantly trying to bring about this workers' paradise uh, through relentless criticism of the current institutions. And so since Marx was a militant atheist, they don't believe that there's any absolute truth that we need to worry about. We do not need to worry about being just. We don't need to worry about being judged by a God. And therefore, the only thing that really is important to them is the victory of their establishing socialism followed by communism. And therefore, any tactic is justified to achieve that, including lying and blackmail, all kinds of things. So that's one strain of propaganda. And I do have several chapters in the book where I talk about Yuri Bezmenov. He was a KGB defector who defected first to Canada and then to the United States. And he was working with the KGB in India. And he soon realized that it really was not oriented towards building a world of justice. It was really designed more to accumulate power, and he did not agree with that. So he talks about four stages of subversion of the West. We usually think that our enemies are going to attack us with weapons, and of course we do need to be prepared militarily to to resist. There are a lot of enemies that have nuclear missiles and other weapons. But he said that 90% of the efforts of the KGB in America had nothing to do with the military. It was with demoralization of our society. So, and the Chinese military leader and strategist and philosopher Sun Tzu also spoke about psychological warfare, where you demoralize the enemy, and you cause your enemy to lose faith in their own culture. Your enemy comes to believe that they are evil and that therefore they have no reason to defend their nation. And so that's one strain of propaganda that we in America really need to understand. The propaganda and the tactics of demoralization of our society and institutions. And I have a lot of evidence about how our military has been damaged, the FBI has been damaged. Many of the institutions that Americans have looked up to for many, many years, they really have been damaged. And so that's something that we need to address. And there's another strain which actually the Kauzem manual did not deal with, which I do try to pay attention to, is the eugenic strain in the West, which basically starting with Thomas Malthus, who in the year 1800 or 1790, 98, and then afterwards basically came out with this theory that the human race was multiplying too fast and it could not expand its resources of food and other resources, and there would be mass famines and starvation. And so that began this strain of thinking that we need to have depopulation of the world. And after Charles Darwin came out with his theories about random mutation, natural selection, that was combined with the theory of Herbert Spencer, the English philosopher, who said there is no God. There's just blind, uncaring nature that doesn't care whether you live or die. And therefore, we really shouldn't spend much effort to take care of the poor and the meek people of the world, because we're just feeding people who really don't have any value, and we should just let the survival of the fittest, basically. We should just encourage people who are smart and educated and powerful. They should have more children, and the poor and the wretched should just basically be encouraged to die off. So we do have this depopulation track of thinking that was very powerful. I don't know if the listeners know this, but Adolf Hitler admired the eugenics movement in America. He actually wrote about it, how the in California, Virginia, and several other states, Ohio, other states, they had laws which permitted, and the Supreme Court said this was okay. It's okay to involuntarily sterilize people who are not considered to be fit. Uh, and I have some really tragic stories of men and women who actually they were sterilized by doctors when they were teenagers, and they didn't know. They thought they went into surgery for an appendectomy, and then 40 years later, they realized the reason they can't have any children is because they were sterilized. So that's another strain of basically the. I have several chapters of the book dedicated to the idea of dictatorship of the intellectuals. You look at the research on the attitudes of people who are highly educated, go to graduate school, they are much more likely to say that it's people like themselves who should run the United States, and that the constitutional limits on power are interfering with them making a better world. Some people call it technocracy. And President Woodrow Wilson was a big advocate of this. He greatly expanded the federal government, and he wanted to create a government of experts that would run our society and basically not necessarily with the approval of the population.
Yeah. So, yeah, as far as the technocracy, it seems like, or at least I've heard like people like Bill Gates being involved in either overtly or covertly trying to reduce the population based on his own analysis.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, his father, I believe, was one of the leaders of Planned Parenthood when it was being, in the early decades. And apparently, he seems to have the same line of thinking as his father. And there have been some scandals where some of the vaccines that he was promoting in India and in Africa killed a lot of people. So the fact that we have RFK Jr. now letting the American people know that many of the vaccines that we are mandating for our children have never been tested with a double-blind placebo. So I think, if anyone has studied statistics or a little bit about science, you want to compare your treatment or your drug to a neutral substance like saline. It was basically salt water, and to see if there's any benefit or defect basically to doing nothing. And he revealed that the vaccines that we are mandating on our children, they are not tested in comparison with a placebo like that. They're compared with other vaccines. So these other vaccines may have harmful effects, but if you're comparing your new vaccine to an older vaccine, they may be similar in their impact, right? You're not going to determine is it adverse or not. So that's one wonderful thing that I think he is doing. And there is the problem of the entanglement of the National Institutes of Health with the pharmaceutical industry, Pfizer Corporation, Moderna, etc. And I go into detail into some of those relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also heard, I don't know if it's true that some of these vaccines and other things that are being promoted by the technocrats actually promote or uh, exacerbate the ability uh, of people to have kids, right? Basically, they kind of sterilize them or reduce their sperm count or things like that.
Right. Yeah.
You,
So in Canada, there's been quite a bit of research in Canada. They found, I believe this is in the province of Ontario, that women who took the COVID vaccine and booster, they have a 17% increase in miscarriages. That's nearly 1 in 5 pregnant women not being able to have a child. And then there was a study in Holland in comparing, this was a study of sperm donors. So someone comes in and wants to donate their sperm for money, you have to evaluate the quality and health of that man's sperm. And they found that the sperm of men who came in after 2021, which is when the COVID vaccines were pushed throughout Europe, was about more than 20, about 21% or in that area, less active, less mobile. So you have kind of sperm that probably don't have the energy to get to where they need to be, which is the egg, and to fertilize the egg. So, from both of these, kinds of studies, you see that it actually could fit into a depopulation agenda. If much of the world's population was mandated to take these COVID vaccines, so-called vaccines, and if you're getting roughly a 1/5 decrease in procreation, that's a huge effect. So,
yes, it is. Yeah, you mentioned about how the enemies of the Genesis 128 culture and the promoters of Marxism are use demoralization. And it actually made me think of kind of, I don't know if it's originally meant to have these kind of two different meanings, but demoralize, when people usually, when I think about demoralize, I think like you kind of lose hope or you lose a vision, you lose power. I'm demoralized, right? I have no more enthusiasm. But it's also demoralizing can also, I guess, mean destroying people's morals.
right, exactly. Right.
And that's the way to destroy a culture is by promoting promiscuity, breakdown of the family, homosexuality, lack of multiplication, all that.
Absolutely. I mean, and also not prosecuting people for crimes they commit. In California, if you steal merchandise that is worth less than $950, they will not prosecute you. You can go into the store and steal $949 in merchandise, and they're not going to, you'll probably be let go within a few hours, and you can just keep on doing it over and over again. And uh, this also related in Europe. There's been a huge rise in rapes of women in Germany, in the UK, in many of the European countries. You have young men from North Africa and from the Middle East who basically have the view that, who are raised in a very traditional Muslim culture, which says that if a woman is not dressed in a very with the hijab and cover her body completely covered, she's a whore, and then she can be raped. And so the and I have some of the court cases where women have been raped for gang rape for hours, and the judge said rules that we really do not have evidence of the motivation of the rapist, and therefore they let the rapist go with no punishment, or a very, very mild punishment. So also the issue of domestic violence in the West, if you beat your wife or girlfriend, you could be prosecuted and sent to prison for several years. But if you're in a Muslim family, many of the judges in Germany and other European countries, they have a different standard. They say in the Muslim culture, it's permitted for a man to beat his wife, and therefore they don't punish those men. So it's to break down. Basically, instead of saying there's one standard of morality and justice that we all need to follow, and a law, it's creating literally a double standard. Yeah.
So at the institutions of higher learning in America, do you think we have hope that they're going to raise up the young people to promoting Genesis 128 civilization, or are they in a different category?
Well, I think they have other agenda. I mean, even aside from Genesis 128, how about just promoting objective science in an effort to find out what is true? That would be a nice place to start, right? But if you apply for a grant to National Institutes of Health under the Biden-Harris administration, you had to write in your grant proposal, let's say about chemistry or nuclear physics, you had to write in there how your grant will advance the purposes of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, racial justice, in your research grant. So, and I mean, I could give you many, many examples like this, that you have the twisting of even scientific research to serve a leftist agenda.
So there's a lot of smart people, right, at these universities and these technocrats, but you talk about a dictatorship of the intellectuals. What does that mean?
Right. Well, actually, let me go back to your question, which I didn't answer about do the scientists want to advance Genesis 128 values, right? And actually, if you look at the real science says the healthiest place for a woman to be, the safest place for a woman to live, is in a home with her husband. She's much less likely to suffer domestic violence. She's healthier, she's happier, she's going to live longer if she's married. And it's actually same for men. So in terms of Genesis 128 values, which does encourage fidelity in marriage, right? The real science actually affirms what the Bible says. The Bible says that you shouldn't commit adultery. You should be faithful to your husband or wife. Ideally, you should wait until marriage to have sex. The research shows that people who had sex as teenagers with different partners, they're more likely to get divorced. They're more likely to be less happy in their marriages. So if they were really interested in what the science actually says, they would be sharing that information. But in many cases, they don't because it's not politically correct.
So it seems like in generally in culture with young people, especially, they have this concept that, oh, we should just, while we're young, while we're still in our 20s and 30s, we should just enjoy our life, explore different things, travel, don't
Right,
settle down. And if you do have a partner, don't have any kids, that'll just kind of prevent you from advancing your career, especially for women.
right.
So how do you see do you see that culture changing or possibly?
Well, I mean, I think, look, the feminist movement, which is a strain of Marxism, basically, um, told women that being married was contributing to the patriarchy, and you're making yourself a slave to a man, and told women you'll be a lot happier if you have your own career and forget about having children and being married, and it's not important. Well, there are a lot of women who followed that, who did put their career. And look, I'm not against women having careers, but if a woman seeks a career to the exclusion of having a good marriage and having a family, many women, they find out when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s that having a few $1 million in their bank account doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make them happy. They they realize that they follow this ideology. A lot of the purpose of the book to let people understand there are these false ideologies that that basically are lying to you. They sound very they can be very passionate. They have a certain line of argumentation that seems to make sense, but when you look at them more closely, they the results are not good. I mean, in the case of communism, there's mass murder, right? But even with the COVID, the mandates, which was happened not just in America but throughout the world, the there are very harsh side effects, and people have died because of taking, the COVID vaccine, and businesses were shut down. Uh, Billions, millions of people went into bankruptcy. All these effects. So that's why I say that you shouldn't trust experts. You really need to do research and find out. There may be an ideology that they're promoting, and there's another effect. Many of the young people. I think some of you saw that Greta Thunberg. She was on a boat headed for the Gaza Strip, uh, and she wanted to protest, what Israel's doing in the Gaza. And when I was doing research for the book, I found out that Greta Thunberg is actually very representative of what many young people, young adults her age, think. They're more hopeless. They're told that we are contributing to the death of our planet. Let me. I want to read to you one passage that I found. Um, Let me see if I can. Yeah, here we go. This was in the Atlantic Monthly, and there's an author, which is kind of a leftist magazine. It's kind of upscale magazine, and Jedediah Britton Purdy is the author. He calculates how many tons of carbon his newborn son James can be expected to emit each year. In despair, he laments that, quote, as an American, his son can expect to emit 16 metric tons of carbon a year. He envisions himself telling his son that, quote, the world is good for all the bad in it, a good place. And you are good, full of joy, born innocent. But you are not good for the world. When you do all the things you will do, work, play, love, you'll be breaking down its systems, making it unlivable. There's very little that you personally can do about it. So he wants to write a letter to his son saying that his simply breathing is hurting the planet. And this is a kind of ideology that Generation Z and the millennials have been fed.
Right. I've seen a lot of videos, even going like to X and other sites that have been posted, people just ranting and full of hopelessness and anger,
Right.
and
Yeah.
there's no joy, no hope, no love, because I assume that they've been filled with this kind of ideology, this
Right.
anti-human, anti-God, anti-moral ideology.
In the book, I quote William Happer. He was a professor of physics at Princeton University, and he points out that carbon dioxide is good for the planet. Plants need carbon dioxide to to create well, oxygen, of course, and photosynthesis, which creates plants that we can eat and feed to animals, etc. Right? So he actually says that because there's a somewhat higher level of carbon dioxide, not nearly as much as existed in past centuries and millennia. The actually you have the greening of the desert, and the Sahara Desert's getting smaller because the more carbon dioxide there is, the less water the plants need. So even in a more desert-like environment, plants can grow if there's higher levels of carbon dioxide. So I mean, there are a lot of different things that scientists who a lot of the so-called research that supports climate change, it's it's very poorly done research. And that's another part of the book is to describe the low quality of scientific research that's being done, and it's actually serving purpose of propaganda.
So in this book, you're really an advocate of Genesis 1:28 civilization. But one of the big buzzwords is multiculturalism. So what's wrong with that? Why do we need to stick with the Bible and Genesis 1:28? What about multiculturalism?
Right. Okay. So in the Western culture, we value tolerance, right? And I think everyone here on the call tonight, we believe in being tolerant, and we don't use force to force other people to believe what I believe, right?
Right,
So, yeah, on a personal level, that I believe that is a good way to approach other people. We the biblical view is that each person is originally created in the image of God and should be treated with respect. That's what Jesus taught us, right?
right. So
But
I
when
guess
you
there's a
apply it,
difference between tolerance and multiculturalism.
right? Yeah. So in many European countries and Western countries, they 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 apply this idea of tolerance. And in addition to that, they have the idea that, well, the Western countries became rich and wealthy by colonizing other parts of the world and stealing their resources, and we are too prosperous. It's not fair. Therefore, we are obligated to allow poor people from other countries to come in and benefit from living in our country. And because the birth rates have gone down so sharply in Europe and many countries, uh, women, they're getting more educated, they want to pursue careers, less interest in having children, then there's another reason to let other people come in, to be workers. That's kind of the idea. The problem is if you're bringing in people from a radically different culture where women are viewed like trash, where women can be beaten in public by their husband. I have videos, I could show it to you if you're interested, of a woman being beaten in public by presumably her husband, and there are dozens of men shouting and applauding the man who's beating his wife. And so their view of human rights is not the same as we have here in the United States. Many people believe that the Europe will not survive as the Europe that of culture and prosperity. Some people call it Europeistan, and basically you have, and of course, you have the anti-Semitism and the hatred expressed toward people of the Jewish faith. The ironic thing is, it's not just towards Jews. Christians are being murdered in Nigeria. 60,000 Christians were murdered in recent years, and throughout the North Africa and the Middle East used to be Christian. That's where St. Paul and the early disciples, they went and evangelized North Africa. You know, St. Augustine lived in what we now call Libya, and Egypt used to be completely Christian, right? And right now, about 10% of the Egyptian population is Coptic Christian, 90% Muslim. And you have girls being kidnapped and forced to marry Muslim men. And when the family complains to the police say, you better keep your mouth shut or we're going to arrest you. So there's a war on Christianity and Judaism both. And in a way, I would say in the book, I kind of go into how Hitler made an alliance with the Muslims. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem met with Adolf Hitler and helped the Nazis in many, many different ways. And because they shared the same goal, which is to eradicate Jews, basically, in this case from the Middle East. And so there's that relationship. And then later on, in the 1970s, the Soviet KGB, initially they had supported Israel because Israel was founded by socialists, but they realized that actually supporting the Muslim countries made a lot more sense because there's already this element. If you read the Quran, there are many, many verses about killing Christians and infidels and Jews and, describing them as vermin and that should be eradicated. And the idea that if you die in the act of killing an infidel, you'll go straight to paradise. So the Soviet KGB saw how this aspect of Muslim culture could be kind of inflamed and encouraged and increased and used as a weapon against the West. It's not just against Israel, it's actually against the entire West. In Iran, they chant on a daily basis, they chant death to Israel, death to America. Israel is the small Satan and America is the big Satan. So you have this alliance of communism and I call it the woke fascism, the eugenic woke fascist technocratic state and radical Islam, and they're all working together to attack the West. And I would say that they've had quite a bit of success. And I do think that Donald Trump is doing some things to try to stop what they're doing in the United States. But this is not an easy thing to solve. It's very, very complicated. They have infected our universities. They have infected many, many of our institutions, the military, the FBI. You know, the FBI viewed sincere Christian patriots as domestic terrorists. So our own, Justice Department was basically hunting down and arresting pro-life demonstrators. So you could see what was happening.
I see. So you definitely laid out quite a case for seeing all the enemies of Genesis 1:28 civilization. But do you feel like there's hope going forward? And what do we need to do? What does America need to do?
Well, I mean, actually, I do have hope because actually the science, I think everyone here knows about the Big Bang Theory, right? The science believes because of the redshift, the universe is expanding, right? And when they project back, they project that the entire universe came from a single point, that there was no time and no space in the very beginning. Well, that is exactly what the Bible talks about, right? And so science is finding, even at the biological research about the human cell, there are dozens, every cell in your body has dozens of tiny little machines that are extremely more complicated than any of the machines that you and I are using. Our life is based on DNA. The DNA is the most complex compute. Even Bill Gates said that the DNA is like the most complex computer code that ever existed. It's an information, and information comes from intelligence, right? So the more we look at what science is revealing about the natural world, the number of atheists has been going down among scientists. Used to be the majority of scientists were atheists, and that is changing. Many scientists are realizing that the materialistic worldview does not explain the complexity of life. It does not explain how the universe came into existence. And that's why you have many former atheists. Antony Flew was probably the greatest atheist of the 20th century. And later in his life, he publicly confessed that he was no longer an atheist. He'd come to the conclusion that if you really understood what science was revealing, it was impossible to believe that there was a material cause to the universe. So that's in my view, that's an encouraging thing,
Yeah,
encouraging trend.
the more scientists discover about the reality of the universe and how complex it is, the more they realize that Darwin's theory just doesn't cut it. So,
Exactly.
so Dr. Panzer, thank you very much for being with us in this evening, and I want to let you tell us how to get your book one more
Yeah.
time.
Okay. So you can go on Amazon and you can search for Richard Panzer, Genesis 128 Civilization, and you'll see my book. I do have a website, which is GEN128 civilization.com. And so
Again, one, two.
either place is fine. We are coming out with an audiobook version, and we just came out with an updated version today. So,
Oh, today. Okay, good timing. Excellent.
yeah.
All right, thank you very much.